Hello, my name is Erin Gless, and I am with the Pacific Whale Watch Association. Today, I'll be talking a bit about the whales and other wildlife of the Salish Sea. These are some of the most recognizable species that might be negatively impacted in the event of a catastrophic oil spill in this region. Before talking about some of these species in detail, a general overview of the Salish Sea. This is a map showing the Strait of Georgia, Strait of Juan de Fuca, and Puget Sound, which collectively make up the Salish Sea. The Salish Sea covers about 6,500 square miles of sea surface area and is home to hundreds of different species. There are 38 mammals, 172 bird species, more than 250 fish species, 2 reptiles, and more than 3,000 macroinvertebrate species, or invertebrates that you do not need the assistance of a microscope to see. So the Salish Sea is really a diverse and rich habitat, again, one that would be detrimentally affected in the event of an oil spill. Starting near the top of the food chain, we do have 4 species of whale that we see frequently in this region. Those are humpback whales, killer whales, also known as orcas, gray whales, and minke whales. We'll start with killer whales or orcas, which are perhaps the most iconic of the whale species in this region. For killer whales, the males are typically larger than the females, reaching up to 30 feet in length and about 25,000 pounds. Orcas are very long-lived. We do believe that the females live longer than the males, with females reaching potentially 80 to 90 years of age, males living about 30 to 40 years, with some males alive in the region in their 50s as of right now. Their diet is varied depending on the type of orca, which we'll talk about next. But as far as presence goes, it's possible to see orcas year-round. They are not a migratory species, so you can see them during any season. And as I mentioned, there are different types of orcas around the world. The 2 that we're most likely to encounter here in the Salish Sea are the southern resident killer whales and the bigs, formerly known as transient killer whales. Southern resident killer whales feed primarily on fish, especially Chinook salmon. They are unfortunately an endangered population, and we believe that there are currently 74 members making up the J, K, and L pods of the southern residents. Their range is from Southeast Alaska down to Northern California, and southern residents typically travel in larger groups, but they are typically spread out across a farther distance. This is in contrast to the bigs, again, formerly known as transient killer whales, which feed on marine mammals such as seals and sea lions. Their population is currently thriving. They're increasing at about 4% per year. And we estimate that there are about 350 to 400 animals making up the bigs population in the Salish Sea region. Their range is also Alaska to California, and they typically travel in smaller, more tight groups while they're foraging. On to our baleen whale species in this region. Humpback whales are one of the largest. They're about the size of a school bus, so 40 to 50 feet in length, up to 80,000 pounds. And they are long-lived as well, about 70 years or so is our best estimate. They have a varied diet. They feed on very small things, so krill and small bait fish. And while it is possible to see humpback whales at any time of year, their peak season is April through October. Humpback whales are a migratory species, so they spend the summer months in cooler waters, which is where they feed, so we are their feeding grounds. And then in the winter months, they go to warmer waters where they either breed or give birth. Here in the Salish Sea, we are a unique spot because we get 3 different populations that all kind of interact and feed in one spot. So we have members from the Hawaiian humpback population, which is currently not threatened. We do get representatives from the Mexican population, which is currently listed as a threatened population. And we do have a few representatives from the Central American population, which is currently listed as endangered. So humpback whales in general are doing quite well, but we are unique in that we do have some representatives from populations that aren't off the endangered species list yet. And so that's one reason to continue to ensure the health of their ecosystem. Gray whales are similar in size to humpback whales. They are also about the size of a bus, living about the same length of time, but they are benthic feeders. So they feed by scooping food up off the bottom. And in this region, they are feeding primarily on ghost shrimp, which burrow down in the mud. It is possible to also see gray whales at any time of year, but they too are a migratory species, and we tend to see them in the highest numbers during the months of February through June. We typically see gray whales as they are passing through on their annual migration from Mexico up to the Arctic, which is where they feed in the summer months. Now, our population of gray whales in this area is not huge, but we do have a stable, regular population. They are nicknamed the Sounders. They come in each spring to feed in Puget Sound. And it's a group of about a dozen or so whales, but it is the same 12 whales that continue returning year after year and have been doing so for at least 30 years. So we do know that this area has significance to that group. Gray whales have been in the news a lot lately. They are experiencing what's known as an unusual mortality event. Over the last 5 years, about a quarter of the gray whale population has passed away, which is a bit alarming. And what we're finding is that the gray whales that come into Puget Sound to feed look to be in better physical condition than those out on the coast. And so again, we're just learning that this region of Puget Sound seems to hold special feeding importance to gray whales, which is why it needs to be protected. And then the smallest of our large whale species here are the Minke whales. They're about 30 feet in length. Also, a good lifespan, about 50 to 60 years. In fact, the longest living Minke whale on record was from the Salish Sea. And they, just like humpback whales, do feed on both krill as well as a variety of small bait fish. They, again, like all whales, can technically be seen year-round, but they have a fairly short season. We usually see Minke whales in the largest numbers during the months of May through September. Not much is known about Minke whales as far as where they go when they are not here in the Salish Sea, but like our gray whales, we seem to have a small but regular population. So at any given time, we may only have about 10 to 12 Minke whales in this area, but they are recognizable and are the same whales that have been returning year after year. Minke whales are a type of whale that has not been studied at length, like some of our others, such as orcas or humpback whales. So again, we're not sure where they go when they're not here. Also, don't have the best population estimate. By last count, along the entire coast of California, Oregon, and Washington, there were only about 600. So they're not an endangered species, but we're not talking about a huge population here in the Salish Sea either. So it would be pretty dramatic if something were to happen here. As we're still learning so much about this species, we're not sure what impact that would have on the population. Now, in addition to our large whales, we do have some other cetaceans that call the Salish Sea home. Here are a few of them. We do have harbor porpoise, which are quite abundant. They're going through a population resurgence in the last few decades, which is great. Dall's porpoise, which are quite a fast species of porpoise, also in the Salish Sea. While not as frequently cited as harbor porpoise, it is fairly typical to see Dall's porpoise in this area. And then Pacific white-sided dolphins. Pacific white-sided dolphins usually are going to be found in the northern portions of the Salish Sea, up in the Strait of Georgia. However, typically every year we will have at least a few sightings of white-sided dolphins down near the San Juan Islands. In addition to cetaceans, we do have several pinniped species that are found in the Salish Sea. And the four main ones are going to be harbor seals, California sea lions, stellar sea lions, which are a bit larger, and the largest of our pinnipeds here, which are northern elephant seals. All four of these species do feed in the Salish Sea and can be found year-round. For certain species, such as the stellar sea lions, we see even more of them during the fall and winter months. In the summer, they tend to go out to the outer coast, but we do still have some of them year-round. So all of our pinnipeds have a year-round presence here. And for harbor seals, stellar sea lions, and northern elephant seals, we do know that all three of those species not only feed here, but they do rear their young here as well. So we are an important spot for them, not only to feed, but also to nurse and raise their pups. As far as birds of concern in the event of an oil spill, as I mentioned, we have nearly 200 bird species, so all of them would be vulnerable in the event of an oil spill. But some of the ones that would be particularly affected are here on the screen, starting with both tufted puffins and common murres. Both of these species have been experiencing some challenges in other parts of their range. Over the last few years, due to what we believe is increased ocean temperatures, there has been a food shortage in other parts of their range, such as off the Oregon coast and in Alaska. And in the last 5 years or so, thousands and thousands of these species have washed up along shore. So, here in the Salish Sea, if something were to happen to their habitat and we lost more of them because they're facing challenges elsewhere, that would be particularly alarming. Marbled murrelets are a favorite among birders here in Washington. They are vulnerable, and as of last counts, their numbers are declining here in Washington due to habitat loss. They nest in old growth forest, which unfortunately they don't have as much access to. And as of last count, there were only about 1,800 marbled murrelets in Washington. So they're a species of concern. And then black oyster catchers, another birding favorite. These guys are quite charismatic. They have a great vocalization. They're not actually seabirds, but they do forage right there along the shoreline. And so if there was an oil spill and that oil were to come ashore, it would directly impact their food source. And black oyster catchers, there are only about 400 as of last count in the state of Washington. So again, these are some birds that would be really negatively impacted in the event of a spill. And then just some other vulnerable species of note, salmon, of course. These are always in the news. We do have all 5 species of Pacific salmon that call the Salish Sea home at one point in their life. And many of those salmon populations are on the decline due to habitat loss and other factors. And so we certainly don't want anything else to compile the challenges that are already facing salmon. Sea stars, both purple sea stars, which you see in this picture, as well as sunflower stars, are going through some population challenges. A few years ago, we started seeing them fall victim to what's now been known as the sea star wasting syndrome. Huge populations have been wiped out of these sea stars due to a mysterious virus. We're starting slowly to see a little bit of a recovery for the purple sea stars. Those giant sunflower sea stars are still not doing very well. 90% of their Pacific population was wiped out, and they were recently put on the endangered species list. So that's one we don't want to lose for sure. Sea otters, we don't have a huge population of sea otters here in the Salish Sea, but we do see a few each year. And in the last several years, we've been seeing more than usual. Already this year, we've had about 3 or 4 sea otters documented in the San Juan Islands, which is a bit unusual. That's more than normal. And as we know from watching sea otters interact with oil spills in other places like Alaska, that would be very devastating for them. And then the last one I want to mention is bait fish. So many of the species that I've talked about so far in this presentation rely on bait fish as a food source. The birds, the pinnipeds, the cetaceans. And so they're a hugely important building block of our food web. If anything were to happen to these populations of bait fish, if they were to collapse, all of these other populations would collapse as well. And so we really need to be mindful of what's at stake with those bait fish populations. These, of course, are just a few of the species that would be most vulnerable. Any species would be, in jeopardy in the event of a catastrophic oil spill. If you have any questions about anything in this presentation, please feel free to reach out at Erin at PacificWhaleWatchAssociation.com. Thank you.